Good. Okay, welcome everybody. Good to see you all again. Got another brilliant conversation lined up for this evening with Dr. Risa Vanfleet. Hi, Risa.
Hi, it's
I've
great to be
been.
here.
It's brilliant to have you, and we've been talking about getting together for a while, but of course, yeah, it's just getting kind of things together. But I've been really looking forward to it because we've spoken before, and there's a lot of different threads I think that we've pulled on together through our own different kind of work that we look at, and I really got to know you through the human half of dog training, which I read a few years ago now, and that was a really important book for me on many levels actually because it invited me to consider the human side of things, but to allow me to go back to this human stuff that I already kind of knew from my previous profession, if you like. So we'll come on to that in a mo. But Risa, I want you to kind of share a little bit about your own story to start off with, I think, because I think it'd be useful for us to get to know you a little bit in that sense, and your own journey, because I know you've got a human psychology background and a human kind of trauma and family support background. So take it off from wherever you want to start, really, and then bring us up to where you're doing things now and those different threads that you pull to bring that
Okay,
together.
well, there are definitely threads that come all the way through. I am a licensed psychologist, but my background or my doctorate is actually in human development and family studies. I got into some clinical psych programs. I thought that's what I wanted, but I had an experience that changed all that. And the experience was taking a workshop with Bernard Gurney, Dr. Bernard Gurney. And he and his wife developed something called filial therapy that maybe we'll talk about, but it's a theoretically integrative model that I loved because it was all about helping parents help their own children. And we were there to guide the process. And so I spent a lot of years doing that and teaching other people to do it. And, but I was so impressed with the way he taught the whole course. I decided, no, I want to go and learn more from him. So I did. I became his teaching assistant and I learned a lot about the whole family side and looking at lifespan development. How do we change over time? So I worked a lot with kids and families. I always included the parents whenever possible, or guardians, foster parents, whatever it might be. And one of the things that happened was that I would go to various conferences where there were child therapists present. And I would hear them talk about, oh, the kids are so great to work with, but the parents, ugh. And I didn't like hearing that because parents are really important to how their kids turn out and how the kids feel about life in general. And many years later, when I started going to dog training and dog behavior conferences, I had the same experience, which was, oh, the dogs are so wonderful to work with, or the animals are so great to work with, but the owners or whatever you want to call guardians, whatever the people, were not so great to work with. And I understood that from all the years I worked with families to really be a statement of, I don't know what to do with them. And so that's where human half of dog training came from. Um, the background that I have with dogs is fairly long now, too. It's not the 50 years with people, but it's 20 some years. And I started off volunteering because I knew the behavior stuff before. I had that background. But I started volunteering my behavior services for rescue, and I did that for 20 years. And those dogs taught me a lot. And I think humility is an important piece of all this work, that we understand the best teachers are the animals themselves, but we have to know what we're seeing, in the process. So, so that's kind of evolved actually initially um, into animal assisted play therapy. I had a really amazing dog, still one of the most amazing dogs ever. Hopefully, we all have one of those dogs. But she needed a job because she was really good at ripping up paper towels. I had a client, and I worked a lot with kids who had come from abuse backgrounds, serious trauma backgrounds, and horrible, horrible backgrounds sometimes. And he needed a little something extra. And so I thought, I've got to learn more how to get the dog involved. And through the years, and I'll end with this, through through the years, my interest in animals and dogs, especially, have taken many different paths. I do a lot of different things. I specialize in super, super fearful dogs. Again, I've learned an awful lot from the dogs themselves. I have an article I wrote about what I've learned from those dogs. But developing the animal assisted play therapy program, which I did in conjunction with Tracy Faw Thompson, who is an amazing equine person with her traveling family background, because they worked with horses. She just really understood horses well. And we had a very similar philosophy and way of thinking about the animals as equals, basically. We just have to learn who they are, learn their language, be fluent in their language. And a lot of the same principles I learned in working with families, which has to do with relationships and being playful, and all of those things kind of came together also in animal assisted play therapy. And Tracy and I wrote a book together that won a big award, which was really nice. It's now being translated in several different languages, and that's really nice. But it was all about how the role that animals can play, but we don't want to forget who the animals are. And so everything we do is built around the animal personality and the client's goals. And that's a little bit different than a lot of animal assisted therapy. And that's probably enough for me to
Well, no, no.
blather on about.
Tracy's based in the UK. Is that right?
Yeah, she's
Yeah,
up
yeah,
in Northumberland, North
yeah,
Northumberland.
yeah,
She's actually from a Scottish Romany family.
yeah.
So yeah.
Just for there's a few things I want to kind of build on from that, but just for the listeners, can you just kind of explain the kind of the essence of animal assisted play therapy, what it actually is, and what you hope, what the kind of the reason for it is, and what you want to do with it.
Yeah. Animal assisted play therapy. I've had some of the trainings in animal assisted therapies. I have had lots of training. I have a credential in doing play therapy with children as well. And the dog that I first kind of started involving in my therapeutic work, my work with kids and families, was extremely playful. She had already helped greatly a cat. I had tried 5 years. This was a feral cat that came from the farm next door, I think. And we tried. I tried 5 years to kind of create a connection with this cat. Being, doing pretty decent things, but never quite succeeding. And the first thing I saw was this dog started playing with the cat. And the next thing I know, the two of them are sleeping together. Every day they'd take a nap together, all curled up with each other. Within 2 weeks of that happening, the cat was like rubbing on our legs and like, okay, I guess you people must be okay after all. But the dog's name is Kiri. And Kiri also, I from the rescue, where I was volunteering, there was an Australian Shepherd. There were a group of puppies that came in together. They had been completely unsocialized. They were from a puppy mill that had been shut down. So we know a fair amount about their background. And most of them, one of them was born without eyes and had all the Merle cross kind of problems. And the one that we couldn't figure out what to do with was a psychological disaster. I mean, from a point of view of just really traumatized, unsocialized to people, was a year old and scared to death of everything. So if a leaf came down from a tree, it would be 3 days of abject horror. She would hide in a crate with plastered against the back. So I agreed to take her on, one of those project dogs, who became our dog. And I thought I'd used what I knew from my psychology background of working with kids and also kids that have a lot of trauma, which was let her lead the way. Let her show me what's okay and not okay. Most of the time in the beginning, nothing seemed like it was okay. But we hit on little teeny tiny things that she didn't have a big bad reaction. So I was essentially doing like some consent work with her, but nothing was okay because she didn't know what, she just didn't have any experience with people. And so it took about 4 years, but what actually transpired was that Kiri, being the player that she was, I put them together because I thought, well, if it worked with a cat, maybe it'll work with this dog. And we have a couple big rooms. And I put them together 5 minutes twice a day. And Curie tried like the Dickens to get Katie to play back with her. She, the play bow, the runaway, look back over her shoulder, and could not, it was almost you could. I might be reading into it too much, but probably not. Like she'd stop and look at the other dog, like, well, why aren't you returning what I'm offering you? And I wasn't sure if it would work or not, but I thought play is healing. We know that from Jaak Panksepp's work, but I also knew it from all my play therapy work. And it took 18 tries, 9 days, which isn't that bad. And I saw Katie do a little play poke back. She just poked Curie in the side. And I thought, I knew without any doubt at all, this is going to work. Then 4 years of evolution of that process, Katie actually turned out to be a pretty normal dog in the long run, but it took a long time to get there. But you learn to celebrate those little tiny victories, those little tiny steps forward. And so anyway, in the meantime, Curie had helped with that case. I have video of all this. I recorded all kinds of stuff. And I thought, she needs to be busy. She likes to be. She had some border collie in her, some Rottweiler in her, a variety of things, some beagle in her background. If I did 2 genetic tests just because she was so special, they both came out kind of different. So that's kind of interesting, but maybe the database is better now. But anyway, so I decided to put her to work with me in play therapy. So what animal-assisted play therapy evolved from, that's kind of the background of getting into it. And what it actually entails is mostly it's developed for professionals. It could be allied health, like physical therapists, speech therapists, occupational therapists. It can be for mental health therapists, which I'm in that camp. And it can also be involved with educators. And so there's a number of people, even in the UK, but also here, who are educators who are trained in practicing animal-assisted play therapy in the schools. The idea behind it was to let the animals be who they are. So rather than say, you've got to match up with this nice, docile, quiet, like I understand if you go to a nursing home or a hospital or something like that, you don't want a dog that's jumping around going, hey, come on, let's play. But I do play therapy, and that is what we kind of do some of the time. The kids lead the play to a large extent as well, but I wanted a dog that was more active, that who could also just be themselves. Curie was not the kind of dog that would just sit there and, okay, well, let me know if you want me to be involved. And she wanted to be in the thick of things all the time. So my biggest challenge with her was keeping her out of things she shouldn't be getting into, which we worked that out. I mean, there are some training issues there. But at the same time, I learned I can't do what I do with play therapy and having her involved in it. Like we could do obstacle courses and we could do hide and seek, like for attachment problems with kids. They could hide and she would go find them and they'd be thrilled because she would be looking for them. One day I took in an agility tunnel and one of the more difficult cases that I was working with, a woman, it was a young teen who didn't like to talk very much. The next thing I know, she went in the tunnel with the dog. And some people might cringe at the thought of that, but they were chasing each other around the tunnel. And that was the first play she had done since she was 2 or 3 years old when trauma happened for her. So I thought, I can't keep a dog on a leash, and I don't need to because, this dog was really well trained. So the animal-assisted play therapy focuses on 2 or 3 things. One is relationship. It's all about relationship. Everything has to do with a mutually beneficial, reciprocal relationship. So it's a two-way street. It's not, I'm telling the dog what the dog should do. The dog, if they're inclined to, can offer certain things that maybe the kids will say, hey, let's try that. Like the tunnel was that way. Other times the kids will have ideas and the training does play into that, but it's only a piece of it. So the relationship really matters. And we as therapists have to model what a relationship that's reciprocal with the dog looks like. And I think many of us think we know what that looks like, but I was challenged by the dogs I've worked with. Now I've had multiple dogs that have gone through this. We've trained people all over the world to do it. We've supervised them. And every dog is different, of course, just like every child or every adult. We do this with adults too, is different. And so there's things we think about for interventions. So for any of the mental health people that are perhaps listening in or will listen to this eventually, we always have to remember the client's goals. What does this client need? We don't forget that. Secondly, who is this animal? Who is this dog or horse or guinea pig or whatever animals we're working with? And we do work with other species. But who is this animal and what are they cut out to do? What do they do naturally? What do they enjoy doing? Because we're not going to try to push them to be something that they're not. And third, like how much space do I have? But also the fourth point is how do I like to work? You know, what are the methods that I'm familiar with? So we'll always have those four things in mind when we're doing an intervention. And I'll tell you that I think I'm having gone through this now for 20 some years. I am more creative. I let it out more. Probably it was in there someplace, but I'm more creative because I'm always thinking, okay, what's this dog got to offer? How does that fit with this client? And if it doesn't fit with the client, then maybe there's another dog. That's my excuse for having multiple dogs.
Mm.
Um, but it's really all the relationship stuff I learned and all the child stuff I learned earlier in my career is represented, but in somewhat different fashion with animal assisted play therapy. The other part is animal welfare. And animal welfare is really, really important. And I think there's a lot of people out there, even doing animal assisted therapy work, who say they're doing animal welfare, but they haven't really learned to be fluent in understanding the language of the dogs. So, or they don't watch them. So I've seen some things that like, that's not really what I'd call humane. Um, and so I'm trying to gradually educate people, not to criticize them, but to help them see the animal more clearly, and also seeing their role in terms of their behavior with the animal more clearly, because we have an impact on our animal's behavior, and we need to really be aware of all that. So I've been influenced by lots and lots of people in the field. Probably one of the first ones was Tord Rugas, who I still think has some wonderful, uh, her observations are really very great. Patricia McConnell was another one that started really changing. Everything she's written is wonderful. And then I did read all the behavior books that are out there, but I already knew most of that stuff from before. So it just helped me understand how's this fit with other species. But lots and lots of people. I'm not going to name anybody else just because I'm going to then leave out some key people.
I think what I hear from that is, God, there's so many different aspects to this, isn't there? Because we know the importance of play. We know the importance of play from a developmental point of view for anybody anyway. But we also know how it can be that a very useful bridge to a return to safety for somebody who has been traumatized, a child, a dog. It's that way of kind of within a safe setting. Is this okay? How does this feel? And this thing also about bringing it into the notion of attachments and how important that is, because this is very important, I think, because when we have ended up having situations that have created those insecure attachments, one of the ways that we find a kind of a aspect of secure attachment is a way of finding it within ourselves and finding that we can trust and we can find those different aspects. I love the idea of playing some of those games because and the thing about being found because another living sentient being wanted to find you and that kind of joy that it brings. There's a lot of power in this, Risa. And actually, this also really fits for me about something we'll come on to in a mo. So I'm just going to throw it in and then we'll revisit it though. Is the importance of this for the human side of the lead, even for the professional, because many people who end up working in animal care, part of their own story is forged out of their own traumas and insecure attachments. Actually, many of us found our first secure attachments with an animal, actually. So I just think there's a richness there. So we'll come on to the human end from a professional point of view in a mo. Coming back to this though, what is very different here, I think, about how you've described that is because I heard you quoted before about dogs that help us, and it was a big list of things, including just remember your dog is not your therapist, your dog is not your employee, and I think this is very important to understand about the importance of that equitable relational dynamic with animal assisted play therapy, which is a little bit different to how we might see some of the assistance dog more traditionally, I think.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, there's this tendency for us to, I think it's another form of anthropomorphizing where we start thinking, well, I just finished writing a chapter for my next book, and I was writing about the idea of dogs being unconditional or horses being unconditional or have this kind of magical power to know exactly what we're thinking or that they can heal us. Now, they can contribute to our healing, absolutely. And yes, they tolerate a lot from us. And sometimes they don't mind it. They figure us out probably better than we ever figure them out. And so they will allow that. So there's elements of those things. But when I see a lot of people referring to their animals as therapists, and I don't view them that way, I want them to be who they are. And that they don't have a master's or doctorate degree, which are required in the U.S. for being a therapist, or they're not teachers. They don't have a teaching certificate or anything like that. But they have natural. I mean, they're sensory wise. They are, I think, probably quite a bit more tuned into the world than we are. I one of my dogs is a scent hound. I've lived with beagles and stuff in the past, and I just was watching the last few days the one that's the scent hound. Our weather is changing here. We're getting into our winter a little bit, and she'll go out and stick her nose in the air, and I go out and I stick my nose in the air. I can't tell anything. So, well, it feels kind of fresh and cooler. But so they know things we don't know. And I think we have to trust that they know things we don't know. But I don't think they read our minds. I mean, if we can't read each other's minds, and we cannot, then I don't think we should expect them to. And I don't think we should ascribe magical powers to them because that doesn't do them justice. That I don't think. And the idea that they're therapists, I think we can rely on them too much to make decisions, and then we're abdicating our own role. I mean, I've had a lot of years of school, a lot of years of experience. I kind of know what I'm doing most of the time. And so I don't need the dog to do that. One of the things that Tracy, my colleague who has worked with me closely with a lot of this, has said is that if you can't do it without an animal, if you can't conduct therapy or whatever your profession is without an animal, maybe you're prematurely getting your animal involved. So we have to have
Mm.
our own competencies, and then we can get creative in how the animals come into it. But mostly the way I think the animals should come into it is, who are they? So I've got one dog that loves to be touched. He's kind of more of the docile, quiet kind of dog. And he can serve a purpose for meeting certain goals. I tend to like kind of rambunctious dogs. And I have Jake. Some people that might follow me know he's a bully breed dog. Uh, Amazing with kids, but I don't have him involved with children just yet because he's 4, but not quite mature enough to work with kids. But he's great at a workshop because he goes around and he says, "Hey, how are you? Here's something I can do." And I think he has a lot of potential, but he may or may not ever work with kids. He's great with kids. He was tested with kids multiple times. But for what I do, I don't want a dog completely taking over a session because he probably would be a good one to teach you some bad habits. But I mean, he's a great dog. And then the other dog, the little beagle mix that I have, is probably right now the dog that I have that's the most, I hate the word stable, but she's kind of versatile, maybe is a better word. She can sit back and let people do things and watch. and she can also get very engaged with things if she's invited. So we have, I like that about her. I actually had a client, again, this was like a 15-year-old who we were doing a bunch of things with Josie. She's the Beagle mix. And she said, her tail is always wagging except when she's thinking, and then it stops. And I thought, I never noticed that before. So I started watching the dog right with the client. Sure enough, if she was puzzling something out or doing a puzzle or whatever, her tail, which is usually going like this, all of a sudden would slow down. And then it's like a beagle tail. It's straight up, it's up in the air. It would stop. So, and I've watched her at home many times since then. That client picked up something I didn't, which was great. I mean, she was able to see that. But it's about that relationship. She's noticing things about the dog. I can teach her some things about animal body language, things to watch for, which are also similar to watching human body language. So if I have a client maybe where human relationships are a little bit difficult, social relationships are difficult, we can watch how are we going to relate to this dog and or how do we relate to this horse, and they can learn some important skills that way, that then it becomes easier because they feel like they know something, they have some competence that they can start thinking about applying them in the human world.
I love that. And I love the fact that the real skill is in you as the practitioners curating that space.
Mm-hmm.
That's the skill here, isn't it? Because the animals will do their thing because they're the experts in doing them. Uh, and, and there is a power to this, This is just my own experience. It wasn't in this kind of way as such, but how I do a fair bit of work locally with kind of local social workers and key workers and outreach stuff and that kind of thing. And a few years ago, I gave a little talk to a group of quite vulnerable young adults, so like mid-teens, late teens. And there was one young man there, young gentleman there, and he didn't say very much during the whole session. And I was just talking about the dog that I took along, and talking about things like the good old bucket. We talk about the bucket, don't we? And this dog's journey, just out of the blue, and his key worker actually burst out crying, like holding it together. But when he said, "Do you know what? I think my bucket gets a bit full sometimes," and his story was anger management as a young person. And she got very emotional, the key worker. And afterwards, she said, "You know what? That moment of connection with your dog and that story helped him to realize something very important about himself. Whereas before, when other people within his professional network tried to tell him, that was another aspect of authority telling him stuff which he didn't want to connect to. So these things can be very powerful, can't they? Those kind of dynamics and the opportunities within those spaces that you create as the professional, stories get to play out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think the way we tend to, this is probably maybe too broad of a statement, but maybe not. The way we tend to relate to anybody or any other species tends to be whatever it reflects our experiences, good and bad. I always kid around when I talk about parents, because if people have had bad experiences with their parents, and hopefully they've had some good ones mixed in, but not everybody has that. I always say a lot of times we parent just like our parents, or the opposite. We got to go, no, I'm never going to do it that way again. So we have that, but we do have our own stories and our own influences in our lives. And if we are being genuine and ourselves, authentic, I guess is maybe a better word, um, as we start to interact with our animals, a lot of those same things will come out. So if we say a person with a very high need for control comes along, they might be really controlling with their own children. They might be very controlling of their spouses, their partners. They might be very controlling of even their own selves, their time and the way they handle things. And then if they have an animal, they're going to be looking at all those controlling methods of dealing with that animal. So I think it is a matter of recognizing what is everybody bringing to that space. So I can have my own ideas, but I haven't lived my clients' lives. I always say they're the best experts on who they are, and they might not know who they are sometimes, but underneath it all they do. And so when they interact with the animal, now I make sure nothing happens that is heavily controlling or aversive or anything like that. But I'll teach them, well, here's a way we can get consent from an animal. How about we try this? And that might be out of their range of experience, but then they can reflect on their experience. Oh, I never knew that. I didn't realize. And a lot of what I do will be just pointing out how an animal, like maybe they make a big loud noise and the dog backs up, or they, get a little intrusive. Again, I'm going to stop that if it happens more than 2 seconds. Um, it depends on how the dog's reacting. But if the dog like goes back, steps back, leans back, moves back, does a head turn, I'll say, "Did you see what just happened there?" And hopefully the client will be able to say, "Yeah, it backed up." What do you suppose that's all about? And it's most people can tell, oh, I guess she didn't like it. What could we do, or what could you do that might help her feel more comfortable? And that goes back to what you were talking about, safety, because I think a lot of quote unquote bad behaviors are a result of many years of different experiences. Just like with dogs, we call them bad or misbehaving, and they're probably just being themselves in that moment with the whole thing. So I think that's part of the way. I mean, there's different ways of working, but I try not to tell people things other than, when a dog turns its head and licks its lips, I never can say that. That usually is a sign of a little bit of stress. So, what do you suppose just happened that made that dog feel that way? And what could we do differently? And almost always, these kids that have had these bad, horrible, sometimes experiences are really good at having some empathy for the animal. And that's the start of a whole
Yeah.
different thing.
And that's important, of course, because a lot of empathy, a lot of us who are empathetic, it's not like that's just how we are born. A lot often the time that is actually born out of our need to be hyper vigilant,
Mm-hmm.
that level of awareness, but that becomes almost counterproductive for ourselves because especially if we have a part of our brain that is attaching certain encoding certain things onto that make relationships harder.
Mm-hmm.
Zooming out from this, then, this is brilliant for me because um at the beginning you said within, and I think it's very important actually, I think both of us can agree on this, and this is for the dog trainers and behaviorists out there who might feel that the dog training world is has its different camps and feels a bit disparate and people arguing. It's no different in this human psychology space. So this is very important. And actually, this group is dog center care, and I took the name from that, inspired that from child-centered care, which was a movement moving away from some of this stuff around making children behave, but actually bringing the child's voice into that, and having
Mm-hmm.
that, which was quite groundbreaking at the time, of course, because before then it was very much kind of children should behave in a certain way, and how do we get them to do it, regardless of the
Right.
method. And you said about the fact that some practitioners, working with the children, that's okay, but working with the adults, that's the hard bit. And many trainers will say working with the animals is great, God, working with the really public. But what that kind of tells us underneath that story, I think, is uh, where some of the reinforcement actually really comes from, because the reinforcement comes from our ability to be able to influence the child or the animal based on our terms often and projecting our own narratives, which can easily fall into it. And we can fall into that because it's not challenging for us. Then we can be that power imbalance is there, isn't it? I think
Mm-hmm.
to move into a space of truly having a care-centered working approach for all, you can see why that's more challenging, but how important it is, because all these things you've talked about are universal regardless of the species. And we have to recognize our own self as we look in that mirror too.
Yeah.
Because as I kind of alluded to earlier, as the professional, why do we want to work in animal care? Most of us come into this space consciously or otherwise because of our own stories, because of our own insecure attachments, all these kind of elements that are going on there. So this gives us an opportunity. And what I love about what you talked about there in the way you want to work, there are three important bits there for me. One is the relationship, giving ourselves time. And this is what I want trainers and behaviorists to really take from this in your own working with the dogs and the client is to work in a way that gives yourself time to build a relationship up. Also, it's a process from what you're telling me based on observations. And connected to that is this notion of evidence basing. It's not coming to fix, it's not coming to feel under pressure to be performative. It's like, that's interesting, isn't it? You did that and that happened, isn't it? And it gives an opportunity to support the connections in those relationships. And I think this is a big area that's missing within
Mhm.
normal behavioral practice, actually, about what we can instigate and support as the practitioner.
I think that's a really astute observation, and I would agree with you about all of that because I think, first of all, I just want one of my favorite quotes. I think it's my own, but it might not be. Uh, is where there's people, there's politics.
Well, yeah,
You
it's a
know,
good one.
that's the nature of the beast, and we're the beast. Not always a very, very wonderful one, but some other times absolutely wonderful. Um, and the child-centered approach, I'll just add this in, the filial therapy, we actually train the parents to teach to have non-directive play sessions with their own kids where the parents don't direct it. And it's fascinating. The relationship grows, the behavior problems or other problems start to take care of themselves. And so I was not, and probably still am not, child-centered or other-centered, like non-directive, non-directive myself. That's not my natural place, but I am so convinced. It is natural for me now because I've had a lot of practice with it. But it's not, I like to be, hey, let's do this and let's do this other thing. Nothing really wrong with that. But if you lose sight of the other person, there's a problem. And so I had really good training. I've had a lot of years of practice. So one of the things I learned about Curie in the beginning is I tend to do non-directive play therapy where the kids get to pick what to do and how to do it. And then I'm responding in certain ways that will help them move forward and feel accepted and safe and all of those things. Curie got into the playroom, and I show video in my animal assisted play therapy workshop, the first one, of my first session with her, which was not good. It was great for the child. I was trying to be non-directive, but Curie was like, hey, this is fun. Let me be right smack in the middle of everything. I'm saying, no, Curie, stay back here, stay back here. And it's not good from a dog handling point of view. It's not horrible, but I was doing some molding, like pushing her and holding her and all that. I like people to see my mistakes sometimes too. But then I realized she's a different dog. I have to be accepting of her at the same time that I'm being accepting of the child. And that is another story for another day, maybe. But what you said toward the end is about it being a process. And it is a process. And I think what happens, another thing that's very common in multiple fields, because I've walked in several, is that we tend to like techniques. And I think we like techniques when we're not too sure what else to do or how does this process work? What do I look for? How do I step in? What should I say? I remember when I went through my master's program, we learned all the different theories of psychological practice. And I came out of that and I said, okay, I'm going to do behavior work because that was like clear. Do a baseline, do your observations, then identify the goals, then decide what the contingencies are and blah, blah, blah. That's why I started off doing a lot of behavior work. And I kept thinking, if I'm doing something else, I don't know what to do, when, and where. But I learned, I got more training and I learned to do that. And I think I've seen the same kind of thing in the dog training world where we like behaviorism a lot. I think there's a lot of value to it, but it's not the only theory there is. And
Mm.
it's not the only thing, as you have spoken eloquently about for a long time. We got emotions and social relations and all kinds of other things to pay attention to. So I think, I think that's part of it is it's very clear cut. Behaviorism is like, first you do this, then you do this. It's not really as clear cut as we think. I mean, there's a lot of nuance to it. But that aside, I think that is kind of where maybe the field is. It's going in a good direction. But I'm glad you and others are taking it further because I like to think of holistic dog training. And how do we do all the different pieces that I learned to do with kids and families and that I do with the dogs in our animal assisted play therapy program, that first of all creates safety, as you said earlier, acceptance of who everybody in the picture is, and then we can kind of build on that as opposed to what we think should happen, because it takes a certain amount of arrogance, if I dare say that word, to think that we have the answers for everybody else. We don't. I don't have answers for everything in my own life. I mean, I'm fairly stable, okay person, happy with myself. I went through the years of agony of, oh, I'm not perfect here and I'm not perfect there. But I think it's a matter of really learning that acceptance also of ourselves, that we have to say, we don't have to be perfect. We can be ourselves is probably more perfect than anything else we try to do. But I think also with our dog training clients, whether it's humans, the humans in the picture or the dogs, I think we have to, uh, extend a little bit more of, if we're going to create safety, we have to be accepting of where they are. So like when I wrote the human half of dog training book, I'm in a lot of different dog training groups. I was very active for a while, but now I got my own groups and that keeps me busy. Plus I'm doing other things on Facebook. But I remember people saying, if somebody shows up with a shock collar, I'm going to tell them, or a prong collar or something, I'm going to take them to take it off immediately. That would not be my approach. I went to one woman's home who had a problem with her. She was wealthy. She had built this gorgeous gardens for her dog, and the dog would go down to them and go to the center and lie down because she was using an underground electronic fence. And so the dog would go by where they had trained the dog to hear the beeps or whatever, and the dog, you could just see the dog kind of going, no, no, not this again. And she had a few other issues. Well, I go into her house. She's got a shock collar. It's an older dog. Shock collar on the dog. She had another shock collar on the counter. And she started taking it apart. She said, oh, my kids just got me this too. So the plan was two shock collars, one to get the dog to come back if it's out in the woods behind her house, and the other one to kind of, I don't know. But I didn't, internally, I had the reaction that many might have, like, oh God, no, please don't do that. But I just said, well, why don't you hold off for just a minute? And let's talk first. I want to get to know you and she still kept fussing with it. And I finally just said, no, I think let's just leave that there because you may or may not need it. Knowing in my head that I'm going to work hard that she won't need it. Her kids were really worried about her, and that they wanted to, that control piece came out. And so she did leave it alone. And I talked with her, I did my assessment, I did all the things I usually do. And then I said, you want to see a different way of getting your dog to do some of the things you wanted the dog to do? So I just showed her. It was very simple. Clicker training. She had a gardener there that was going to help her who knew dogs quite well. And I told them to get Pam Dennison's award-winning book or DVD on training a whistle recall. And the shot collars went away in one set, by the next session, by the next time I came back, no more shot collars. So I'm pretty confident in my ability to help people, but they have to know what the alternative is before I can get rid of other things. Because if they've got a prong collar on the dog, I'm going to say, why do you have that on there? But in a tone of voice that isn't, why do you have that on there? It'll be, I notice you have that kind of collar. How did you make that decision? And they'll usually tell me I don't want to be pulled down by my dog or, something else. And then I can give them the alternative of what they need.
But this is why I think we need more. I think you and I, because I agree with you on that. And I talk to a lot of colleagues to get helping them to understand that actually if we go along to see a client and we project our own values and needs and expectations, we've actually crossed the boundary when you think about that.
Mm-hmm.
And but I think that's because you and I both have those aspects of core counseling skills and And I think this is where we need more education for professionals because ultimately we can put conditions on working, but will the behaviors of the client ultimately change longer term? Because if they're
Yeah.
using that, say, prong or that shock collar, because actually, if you have open questions and are curious and want to know, 9 times out of 10, it comes down to safety again. They feel safer. They feel somehow if their dog was able to do this or not do that, then that's why. And they're scared about losing that element of control. And we talk about control in quite a dismissive way, but actually, it's a survival in the thing. Who doesn't want to have control, right? And especially the less control you've had earlier on in the life, the more you want to feel you have some control over outcome now. And yes, within how we work, we can totally say, do you know what, in this session today, I want to show you something else, so we won't need it today. But if we're making demands, I will not work with you unless you do it. There's a good chance that they won't use the tool while you're around, but will they not use it when you're not? And what have we actually achieved? I think this is a really important point.
Yeah.
And whilst we should be meeting clients where they are, that doesn't mean we're condoning what they do. That's really important. But I love this notion of acceptance, Risa, because we have awareness, acknowledgement, acceptance, which is the kind of route that people go, because obviously there's a lack of awareness, but then we need to support them to acknowledge the new awareness they have. The problem with acknowledgement, of course, is that guilt and blame and shame often live there because now they're aware they have this. And then get them through to acceptance, because that's where advocacy lies, as we know. You can't truly advocate for another unless you accept. But if we're going to ask our clients to go through that journey, which is what they will go through, it's unfair unless we do the same for them. So I think it's an important part. Coming back then to what you talked about earlier about the importance of relationship and observations and evidence basing on these things, it's really crucial. We've got to, I feel, now that we know more, I think back in the day when we had a very operant only approach to stuff, which is, this is your training plan, this is the cookie cutter approach, this is how we deal with guarding, this is how we deal with that. It was a bit easier to hide behind that kind of relationship with our clients. But if we're going to really think, yeah, I understand trauma, I understand pain, I understand all these different components, we do have a helper helpy relationship. We do have a counselor style
Mm-hmm.
element about how we practice. So we need to learn more about those skills, I think, to deliver it well.
I think so too. I think that's absolutely true. Um, I think it really is a matter of what, we're trying to teach a dog who has some unwanted behaviors, then we try to teach them what to do instead. I mean, that's a simple process. That's kind of what I was doing with this woman that I described and what I would do with a lot of humans. That's an application of something we all know, but how to do that, because humans are pretty complicated and we don't always like all of them. Um, Whereas we might like the majority of dogs that we work with. But yeah, I think it's a matter of we do have to know that. That's when I wrote the human half of dog training book. But the big first part of it is all about empathy. And what
Hmm.
empathy does is you take your own thoughts and feelings, put them on a back burner, and you try to really pay attention to what the other person is saying and especially what they're feeling. And then in
Hmm.
your own words, briefly, you just kind of state back. It's just a way of checking to make sure, am I understanding? And if you're not, they'll correct you. They'll say, no, no, it's not really that, it's something else. And so I think because we're listening and we're kind of showing that we're really trying to understand them, there's more of an element of safety and acceptance in that, as opposed to judgment. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe. And yeah, I'm like everybody else. I sometimes have those judgmental thoughts, but I recognize when I have them because I know they're not helpful. And that's usually is about me, like you were kind of, I think, implying in what you were saying. That has more to do with me and my sense of security or confidence or whatever it might be. And so to be accepting of somebody else, you do have to feel kind of grounded. And then once you're kind of grounded, then it's a matter of it's okay for people to be different. It's okay for people to have a different point of view. That doesn't take away from who we are. That's who they are. And it's okay that that's there. But I think it's one of the most difficult skills to really develop, because it's not just a skill. What I learned from my mentors in grad school, it's an attitude first. Like, I really do want to understand how this other person is feeling and thinking. And that's hard, especially, let's say they do have a shot collar on a dog or something. They've been, doing some unkind things, that we don't like or approve of or want to be, we don't want to, say that, oh yeah, I think that's all fine. But there's a polite way and a way to kind of be accepting of their feelings while also offering an alternative or showing. It's better to show than talk about, like, just, yes, it was yesterday or last night, on one of my Facebook groups, somebody wrote something, and it was about, I'm going to paraphrase it, and I don't want to reveal, but it was about fear in animals. And the comment was made, well, you have to make them face it. That to me says, maybe that person's had those experiences of having to face it. Now, I'm always aware on social media, there's a whole big audience that might be listening in. And so I don't want to just say, yeah, you're right. That's not what empathy is about. But I could say, well, I could see how you see this point and this point, but I don't completely agree. And here's why I don't agree. And I gave some more information, because we don't get a chance to interact in person that much on, like Facebook or whatever. But I try to be careful not to knock the person, which is probably the problem that we have in a lot of different ways these days. But to say, I might not completely agree with your ideas, but here's where I do agree. And here's maybe where I see things a little bit differently. And then if they keep arguing back, I've already had my say. I try not to keep arguing, because then it gets into my stuff.
It does. And the key there is that those phrases were all about I. This is the point. This is how we assert our own boundaries, is the I's. It's not the U's. You are this and you are that. It's just, I wouldn't consider this, or I might have a different way of thinking about it. And I think that's the way we look at it. But this is an area we've got to start looking into, I think, more.
Yeah.
I do with my own kind of mentoring thing, looking at the emotional side of stuff of animal care professionals, because one thing, like you say, you can't just it's a hard skill, only because if we haven't done the work for ourselves. So you and I both know from my days doing human therapies before I came into animals, that I had to have 40 hours a year of personal therapy myself. So you have to be well grounded, you have to work on your own stuff and understand those things so you can turn up in a healthy way. And it's hard to apply boundaries if you're somebody who, because of your own story, is very susceptible to social rejection. It's hard to have healthy boundaries then, isn't it? Or if you're somebody who has sometimes within animal care, people can have like an anxious attached style with the animals, but an avoidant attached style with the caregiver. And it's just understanding these things, and not as kind of things around our neck, but it's just that awareness that we offer ourselves. Because even the judgment thing, we can't not judge. Of course we judge, but we can change our relationship with that judgment and find different ways. But that's where you build the skills up. And I think that's an area that we need to start giving to more practitioners, including vets and trainers and behaviorists. We need to look at taking the role of supervision more seriously, having opportunities to talk about these things. I think it's important, especially in the training and behavior world, because of the direction it's going, Risa. We are moving into a more holistic space. And they're not our dogs, they're not our horses, they're not our cats, they're the clients. So we have to bring their level of awareness round to what's actually happening in that relationship. So actually, it's quite a hands-off thing for us now. A lot of that, a good chunk of that, isn't just let me show you stuff, let
Right.
me tell you stuff. It's about let me learn your stuff.
Yeah. One of the questions I like to ask clients, behavior clients, animal behavior clients, that I often start with is, when you first got this dog, horse, cat, whatever, pig, I'm a big fan of pigs. When you first got this dog, what were you hoping for? What were you envisioning? They've called me, I work mostly with behavior issues rather than do training, although I do training with the animal assisted play therapy people to some extent. Then I send them out to their own communities to find other trainers. But what were you hoping for? What did you envision? Did you have kind of a picture in your head? And it's really a very valuable question to ask, because the empathy is not for the method that they're using or the bad things, or things that we would be judgmental about. The empathy and acceptance is of their need. And so if you
Mhm.
start to see what their need is, like, oh, I thought we'd go out in the woods and we could go on walks together, but this darn dog chases every single critter that they see, and I have to keep them on a short leash, and then they're pulling me around. Or their need might be, I wanted to take them to all these different places. Now, what those needs are, what I can be accepting of. That's what they wanted. That's their emotion. But that doesn't mean they're going to have their needs met.
Mm.
So, if I have a dog and I live in a city and I wanted to take my dog everywhere I went, and my dog's very reactive to the sounds of, meeting other dogs on the street or whatever it might be, taxis blowing their horns, um, whatever that might be, there's limits to how far we can take maybe some problem areas and just realize, oh, the dog's got a very sensitive hearing kind of thing, or their sensory makeup is perhaps not something we're going to change about the animal that much. We can do our magic as best we can. There, I'm talking about doing magic, and it's not really that, but we can do what we can to help. But part of this human skill, I think, becomes how do we really hear them out and hear their disappointment? Because you might say, I'm not sure we're going to get that far. I think
Yeah.
where we can go is here, here, and here. Not too sure about over here. Again, I'm not going to be premature about saying things like that, but let's say I really know that that's not going to
Mm.
probably be what's possible. Then, or a lot of times the way I say it is not sure. Let's see how far we can go, and then we'll maybe have to think about plan B or whatever. Um, I do that a lot with the super fearful dogs because I don't know, and almost all of them surpass even what I think in the beginning. I've learned to just
Well,
say
that's true.
anything's possible.
And,
I
and
can't.
that's the thing. And I think, but this is a really important point here, isn't it? Because uh, I genuinely believe that the client might have different expectations and different wants, but actually, the one thing they really want is to feel heard.
Yeah.
So even if then our support and our kind of expertise might be saying, well, actually that destination might not be where we get to, but I'll support you to find one that is, super, supportive for you and your dog. I think they're more likely to manage those expectations because they feel heard. And we see
Yes.
this in normal clinical practice, actually. The patients who don't feel heard are more resistant to the things
Yeah.
that come next. I think it's very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I can't believe the hour's flown by. We must get together again. I think there's lots of threads I'd like to pull on, but I would highly recommend your book, The Human Half of Dog Training, for those who haven't read it. I think you've got we all have our own, well, we're all unique, I know. But you especially, Risa, I think these different areas of your life, you've done a beautiful thing over time of rather, I think it'd be very easy to have just moved from one to one and just see them as separate. But actually, you've taken something with you through each evolution of what you do to this beautiful space now of seeing the whole, I think, but also including us in that.
Mm-hmm.
So, how can people find more of you then? Where's the place for them to go?
I would say the relating to animals, I have a website. It's the International. Yeah, I can actually type it in here, I think.
Yeah.
Um, it's the International Institute for Animal Assisted Play Therapy. If I can get my mouse to cooperate, which is,
Mm.
here we go. Um, it's iiaapt.org. It's all came out in caps, but it can be little letters too.
Oh yeah, hang
Um,
on. Okay, yeah, hang on a second. Let's have a look here.
but that's my primary website. You can email me. I
I'll
get
put
a
that in
million
the.
emails,
I'm
so
just putting
it's
that.
probably
Yeah. So I've just put that in the
um,
main chat for everybody, so they can see
okay.
that there. Great.
Okay. And then I have another website, but I'm going to redo it, so I don't even think I'll give the name for that. It was my filial therapy website.
Mhm.
Now I've spun off because I'm not as young as I used to be. They say you're as young as you feel, and so I'm a lot younger than my chronological age, I
Good.
tell
Well,
you.
mental age,
But
how yeah, is important.
but I've
Hmm.
spun off a few organizations that are now handling things that I used to. So we now have an association for animal assisted play therapy. That's a different website. I don't know is that we need all of those in there. We now have a separate group for filial. And then we have the certification board that we have for animal assisted play therapy is a separate entity entirely so that we get away from the conflict of interest of those who train are not the same ones who are granting the certification.
Yeah.
But I'd say if you go to iiapt.org, I'll give my email. There is an info, I think at info at iiapt.org, but I don't mind giving out my name. That if you
Hmm.
really wanted to get me. But if you want to understand more about like what we're doing with the dogs, there's a lot of blogs. I have a lot of articles at the in the resources section of IIAAPT. That it covers a whole big range of what my interests are. Um, and for the therapists that might be listening in, I do have a book called Animal Assisted Play Therapy. I've written like 12 books, but they're in different areas. I like variety. Writing another book now probably won't be out until next spring sometime, but it's going to be more on what I call the 5 E's. This is not the title, but I'm going to talk about the expectations we have of our animals. It's for multiple types of animal species. The empathy for our animals, exploration, which we know the seeking system from Yakpanks up is there, the empowerment and giving agency and then consent, and then enthusiasm. So there's I'm writing it for people that might not otherwise read technical stuff, and
Well, we need
but
that.
it kind of covers, and I do have a chapter I think in there about being self-aware, not in the way that you're talking about it for trainers, but I think
Hmm.
this might be a helpful book to kind of help change people's attitudes, help them see their animals better, which hopefully leads them to see themselves a little bit better. And I
Well,
did want to say, I used the word arrogance earlier. I didn't mean that in a disrespectful way, but it's kind of like when we start thinking, not arrogance in the way that we usually think of it, but when
hmm.
we start thinking we have the answers, I think it's
Well, it's
better.
important.
It's the kind of the opposite of being humble. And I think
Well, we have
there's a lot to be said for humility.
in therapy, person-centered therapy, we talk about the three lenses, don't we? The first lens being the academic science-led lens, very objective. That's the one that many professionals take, of course. But the second lens is so that first lens might be how we geek out on things like trauma and pain and stress and anxiety and learning theory and whatever area you want to learn about. The middle lens is the individual's lived experience of that trauma and that pain. And this is where it gets complicated because none of us, we're all greater than the sum of our parts. And and then that third lens is the third party observer lens, which is also the first lens as well, of course. But that first lens is likely to be a bit more objective. But that third lens could be the parent, could be the caregiver, could be the passerby. It doesn't matter. What's beautiful about looking at that is we also all have that individual lived experience lens too, which informs those judgments and those biases. So the more we're aware of that, that's the humility you're talking about. That's all. I think sadly those first two lenses don't always point in the same direction. We've all experienced that. I've experienced that myself last year with my health problems, and it was the sixth health professional who took me seriously to get me treated. Actually, they're the ones because they were like, well, it sounds like this and your x-ray was fine, so we're going to do this, rather than listening to other stuff and maybe going beyond what their first thought was. So I think that arrogance is a thing we have to be mindful of. There's a notion of us knowing stuff, but parking that to know somebody else's stuff first. I think that's the key of these things. Well, it's been an absolute joy, and I just want to say, in the 15 years that I've been working in the field, your name comes up a lot. A lot of people, you talked about the people that inspire you early, but you've inspired many other people yourself, Risa. And this is the ripple effect as we work together and we kind of move forwards. And I know there's some people very excited to kind of have you come and speak in the group, and hopefully people have found you for the first time, which is always nice as well. And I'd love to have you back, so please do come back. That would be nice to see you. And thank you so much. Just to let everybody know, let me have a quick look here. I can't remember off the top of my head. We've got the amazing Dr. Helen Howell coming in. When's Helen coming in? On the 5th of December. So I got December, Risa. How did that happen? 5th of December, 6:30 UK time. Dr. Helen Howell. Helen's incredible professional who does a lot of the forensic work for dangerous dogs and working with the courts and really trying to change, Risa, how they do those assessments over here in the UK, because these assessments on these poor dogs are pretty barbaric. So it's no wonder they respond the way they do. So Helen is really changing the story there, which is incredible. Wonderful to see you. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in live. And please subscribe to the channel if you've found us through other means. And see you again soon.
Thank you very much. Take care, everybody.